Give me about 30 seconds and I can go. Okay, Claire.
All right, great.
Good. I want to welcome everyone who is taking the time to spend with us this evening to talk about Zilker Park. My name is Ricardo Solis, Division Manager for Park Planning in the Parks and Recreation Department. As you know, Zilker is a 350 plus acre park located in the heart of our city, near the downtown, adjacent to neighborhoods, cultural and retail centers. The park serves as a destination for recreation, education, entertainment, performances, passive and active activities, both on land and water. The park provides an escape for thousands of visitors per year. However, the Parks Department recognized that it is time to begin to look at the future of the park and what decisions and investments were needed to ensure its sustainability for future generations. In 2020, the City of Austin signed a contract with Design Workshop, a planning and landscape architecture firm who organized a multidisciplinary team to help us develop a vision plan for the park. In partnership with the community, like those participating yesterday, today, and tomorrow, we will be able to develop a plan that recommends strategies, practices, and solutions that the Parks Department can begin budgeting and implementing within the next 10 to 15 years and beyond. I want to thank you again for your time this evening. We hope that you will become an active participant throughout this process and invite your family, friends, and neighbors to do the same as other planned meetings in the future. It is time for me to introduce Susana Palmento, who will explain the Spanish translation and how that would work. But before we get started, Susana, I just wanted to say, I want to say that those of you that are attending tonight with hopes to discuss the conditional use permit to allow alcohol at Zilker Cafe, we will not be addressing that issue tonight. The department is reviewing the code and is consulting with the law department on the next steps. So we will not be spending time tonight discussing that issue. So with that, Susana, if you could help us out with your instruction.
O tabletas, presionen los tres puntitos de más y allí encontrarán interpretación de idiomas. Seleccionen el idioma y no olviden presionar listo. Si tienen algún problema, por favor, díganlo háganoslo saber en el chat. Muchas gracias.
Thank you, Susana. Now I'd like to introduce Claire and with Design Workshop that will lead us through the rest of the session.
All right, thank you, Ricardo. My name's Claire Hempel. I'm a principal with Design Workshop in our Austin studio. I serve as project manager for this project. And so I've got a few teammates with me today, and we'll do brief introductions as we get to our sections. On the agenda today, we have a lot to cover. We are focusing on the team's research and understanding of past plans, recapping our engagement to date, and getting input on the guiding principles and goals. So a reminder that tonight's meeting is being recorded and will be uploaded to the project website by tomorrow, so others can access the materials and the survey at their or your convenience. So we have a very comprehensive team for this project with specialties in various categories. We wanted to briefly introduce the team and the makeup of the team because there's a lot to cover with a vision plan for Zilker. So Design Workshop, as Ricardo mentioned, was hired by the City of Austin. We're working for the Parks and Recreation Department and the community and key stakeholders, which is why community engagement is a really important part of this process. So our team is made up of about 14 consultants, including Design Workshop, that are focusing on engagement in equity, economics, environmental ecology and land use, historic preservation and cultural resources, and infrastructure, or the things that allow us to get to and use the park, like roads, trails, sewer, electric, and that kind of thing. So where we are in the schedule, you'll see that highlighted in orange, but we kicked off the project officially in February of this year, 2021. And we have been working over the past 4 months with a lot of community engagement, starting with small group discussions. We've had about 14 of those, and we'll go over a little bit more detail about what we heard in those small group discussions. We've also been doing a lot of background research, pulling together the plans and other documentation that has been done on various parts of Zilker, but to date, there has not been a comprehensive plan done for Zilker in its over 100-year history. So you can see down at the bottom our work product and what we're working through. Looking ahead to later this summer and the duration of the project, we have pop-up meetings that we'll be hosting all through the month of July. We are going to be doing one per district, and those locations are available on the website, and we'll also have a slide on that at the end of the presentation. And then we'll quickly be heading into our second community meeting in August to talk about programming. We'll have another series of pop-ups in October as we also start to get into design alternatives at the third community meeting. And then we are going to have another series of small group discussions to go over those design alternatives sometime in November. Those are still to be scheduled. And then we are looking at a draft plan rollout in January of next year with a fifth community meeting if we need it, but starting to go through the process of boards and commissions approval. So why are we doing this vision plan? Many of us know Zilker as a place to get relief from our sweltering summers in the cool waters, or lose yourself in the trails throughout the 350 acres, enjoy an afternoon with friends on the Great Lawn, attend an event that draws thousands of visitors annually. But Zilker also has its challenges. As the population of Austin grows and remains a popular destination for visitors, Zilker too is experiencing growing pains related to increased visitorship. over 2 million people, which is about the population of Nebraska, a year are coming to the park and visiting the pools, events, and facilities. With the increase in visitors, there's a shortage of places for people to park, as that is the current mode that most people are using to get to the park. And the environment is also suffering, including degraded banks along the creek and erosion at points of stormwater runoff. Some of the facilities within the park, like the Nature and Science Center, Macbeth Recreation Center and Zilker Botanical Gardens, need upgrades and have access issues, making it difficult for school groups and others to visit and navigate between the various things to do within the park without having to get in a vehicle or travel unsafely by foot or bike. So this meeting will provide an overview of the available information that the team has reviewed, review the draft guiding principles and goals, and get your input on guiding the direction of the plan. So to do that, we'll be using Mentimeter tonight as a fun way to do polling. So you'll need a smartphone, but you can also do this on a computer. You'll go to www.menti.com. You'll enter the code that you see here, 71706825, and then click submit. And then as we go through the slides that have questions on them, you'll respond on your phone, you'll hit submit, and when I close the voting, you'll be able to see the results live. So don't worry about having to memorize or write down that code. It'll be at the top of every slide that we have a question on. So we're going to start with a practice question. If you go ahead and go to that website that's at the top, menti.com, and type in the code. We'll ask, what are your 3 favorite things to do in Zilker Park during the summer? So we've got swimming in Barton Springs Pool, hiking on the trails, going to the Zilker Hillside Theater, going to the Great Lawn, playing volleyball, going to the Zilker Botanical Gardens, or other. And if you do have another comment, we encourage you to use the Zoom Q&A function to leave comments there. And that'll be the same for all of the questions that we ask on the presentation tonight. So it's starting to see how many respondees we have. We're at 33, and we've got about 116 attendees. So we'll give everybody a little bit more time. This is a practice question to get warmed up. And I'm seeing in the comments a lot about the train in the playground. Awesome. We'll give everybody just a few more seconds. See if we can keep getting responses. And we'll go ahead and close the voting here. You can see that most of our respondees, the top 3 are swimming in Barton Springs Pool, hiking on the trails, and nearly a tie between the Botanical Gardens and the Great Lawn. So now that you have the hang of it, we're going to find out a little bit more about who is attending tonight. And let's tell us your age if you don't mind. So we've got 17 and under, 18 to 25, 26 to 34, 35 to 44, 55 to 64, 65 to 74, and 75 and older. And this is just a select one. Any of those questions where you can select multiple, you'll see it at the top of the slide. So it looks like we are missing a 45 to 54 bar. I apologize for that. But please do note that in the presentation or in the chat, and we'll get that updated for what goes out on the project website. All right. Give everybody just a few more seconds.
And Claire, I do want to acknowledge that we did miss a key group here, 45 to 54. So for those who are willing to admit it, I see you putting in the chat. We'll make sure that that's included. Thank you all.
Thank you. Yes, and we'll update that, Justin, for the presentation that goes on the website. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and close. And from what we can see on the screen here, we've got most attendees in the 35 to 44 age range, but we do acknowledge that we have some attendees in the missing age range between 45 and 54. So again, our apologies for that. We'll get it fixed. Next question is, what council district do you live in? And we have districts 1 through 10. And we've indicated the council member, which you may know the name of your council member better than you know the number, just to get a read on where you're living. And you'll see different formats for the way that we see these results on some of the questions, just to mix it up a little bit. All right. I'm getting up close to that number that I've been closing it out at, so just a few more seconds. All right. And we were getting questions about zip code per district, and I don't know those off the top of my head, but we do have a question coming up where you can type in your zip code too, just so we can cross-reference the responses here. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and close out. So we have a lot of folks from District 5 tonight, but a decent representation from the rest of the districts. So different type of question. This allows you to type in your zip code. So you're not choosing just one selection, you're just typing it in. And so you'll be able to see here the larger the number, the more responses we're getting to that zip code. So you can see this is a pretty easy way. It's the tests aren't too hard on the survey polling tonight. So just a fun way to represent the data. And we will be posting the survey results to the project website after we get through tonight's presentation. All right, I will go ahead and close out. I've got some more rolling in. Okay, looks like we've got 78745, 04, and 02, but a lot of different zip codes here tonight. All right, what is your gender? And we asked this, we had a similar question in the baseline survey that was going on during the trail flight. So we'll just have a consistency of some of the questions that we asked throughout the process. All right. Just a few more seconds. All right, we've got mostly women with us here tonight. And another question, what race or ethnicity best describes you? So we have Black or African American, white or Caucasian, biracial, multiracial or not listed, Asian or Asian American, Latinx or Hispanic, or prefer not to answer. And we asked this question, we really are, or the series of questions really, we want to really reach out to all of the districts within the city of Austin and make sure that we're getting full representation from the citizens and the population of Austin. So some of these answers help us understand who we might need to better communicate with and get the word out. But our pop-ups will also help supplement some of our outreach here tonight. Go ahead and close out. All right. And then this will also help us fine tune how we get the word out about future meetings. How did you hear about this meeting? And you will select all that apply. So that would be email, city website, the newsletter. Oh, don't know what happened here. I apologize. Don't know what happened. Okay. Go back to, I have not closed this one yet, so we can pick up where we were. So sorry about that. So again, email, city website, newsletter, Facebook, next door, flyer, or other. Lots of email. All right. Let me close in just a few more seconds. And great. So that's the last question for just a little bit. I wanted to touch on the purpose of the vision plan and what is all of this about. We are here, our team is here to support the city in developing a visionary framework that guides the restoration and future stewardship of the park. We'll do that by recommending enhancement of the park's existing facilities and programs, determining recreational and amenity needs, focusing on historic, cultural, and ecological features, recommendations for improved mobility to and within the park, and a sustainable revenue strategy that better balances the operations and maintenance of Zilker with generated revenue. So part of our team's work over the past 4 months has been preparing a site analysis and needs assessment report. That's a mouthful, so we've been calling it the SANA report. And this summarizes the many resources of information and planning that has been done in Zilker over the years. This document is available on the project website for your review and is essentially a chapter of what will become the final document. And there's a lot of detail in it, so I encourage you to go and take a look when you have time. So some of Austin's other metropolitan parks are in areas further out in the city, but Zilker is truly located in the heart of Austin, right next to Lady Bird Lake, downtown, and really close to a lot of neighborhoods and even the city of Bollingwood on the west. So for purposes of our study, we had to draw a line somewhere. And so what you see on the screen is representative of what's contained within the study boundaries. So we're going all the way from the Zilker Clubhouse area, the Zilker Nature Preserve, to Lady Bird Lake, and we go down to A.V. Morton Road. And then we take up a little bit of the green belt as you go southwest. That being said, we understand that there are a lot of things that are affecting Zilker Park from upstream coming down from Barton Creek, and we have things like Mopac that are cutting through, and we have neighbors on our adjacent side as well. And Zilker has the opportunities to positively impact downstream effects through water runoff, the Edwards Aquifer, and Lady Bird Lake. So touching on Austin's population projection, we know that Austin's a very popular place. We've been in the news a lot lately with 184 people moving here a day, according to Austin Business Journal, since 2019. And so we're just seeing our population increasing in growth. And what that means for Zilker Park and the city's park system as a whole is that this park space is a really important aspect of quality of life, and that the focus for Zilker Park Vision Plan is to enhance that quality of life for the population of Austin. So we had a survey that opened the Trail of Lights, so late November of last year, and we just closed it out in June of this year. And this was to provide a baseline starting point for our team to understand some of the challenges, and hopefully some of you all participated in that survey. We received over 108,000 responses from over 4,000 survey takers. Those who answered were mostly long-term Austinites, mostly white and Caucasian, and make over $100,000. So this gives us a good baseline of who we need to try harder to reach out to participate in the process. But we also have some things that we heard about what people love about Zilker. So this is a word cloud. So the bigger the word, the more times that word was input into the survey. So you can see Barton Springs is very popular. Some of the other things that pop out are nature, disc golf, trails, ACL, the Zilker Hillside Theater. And then people had a lot of responses for this. And not surprisingly, not surprisingly, most people get to Zilker right now via personal vehicle. We asked what would encourage other modes of transportation to the park, and heard better trail connections and more and safer bike connections and bike lanes. Once in the park, most people walk around within the park as opposed to biking. And 350 acres is a very large area to walk around in. And we know that there's not a lot of sidewalk connectivity out there right now. Other highlights from the survey include hike and bike trail and pool as the favorite activities and amenities, and overwhelmingly heard the cry for more restrooms. Let's see. People had a lot to say about what natural areas are meeting needs. The trails are currently meeting the needs, but parking has come up multiple times about needing improvement. Lack of parking is why sometimes people avoid visiting Zilker. And then we asked a question about stories or comments about Zilker Park, and we had over 800 responses. So we've just put a few of those here, and you can see there's a lot of different ideas, from considering a land bridge over Barton Springs to bringing back more nature to the park. Accessibility came up quite a bit. A lot of comments about restrooms, but a lot of really great input for the team. In addition to that baseline survey, we had a series of small group discussions. We met with 17 groups that had various areas of focus to hear about challenges to accessing Zilker and ideas for improvements. And later in the presentation, we will review the key themes from these conversations. Some of the groups that we met with were operations and maintenance. So those who are in the park every day, the rangers and park staff, environment and water interests, events, both large and small, neighbors, and so on and so forth. And all of those meetings were recorded via Zoom and can be accessed via the project website. So the history of Zilker parkland goes beyond our recent memory back to native peoples like the Tonkawa tribe that lived on the land, and even farther back. The Zilker land has been home to Spanish colonizers and European settlers, including, I think I skipped ahead a slide, but the Santa report has a lot more detail, but in this presentation, we'll provide a high-level overview of some of the report sections, including history and culture, environment, funding, programming, partnerships, and mobility. So let me try this again. The history of Zilker Parkland goes beyond our recent memory to native peoples like the Tonkawa tribe that lived on the land. The Zilker land has been home to Spanish colonizers and European settlers, including William Barton, who settled on the land now known as Barton Springs Pool. It should be noted that the Barton family brought 25 to 30 enslaved people and established one of the first plantations in Austin, making Barton Springs a significant foundation of Austin's African-American population. Andrew Zilker granted the land to the city in 1917, making Zilker Park over 100 years old. The CCC era provided many beautiful structures in Zilker Park, including the bathhouse, the sunken gardens, and more. In fact, Zilker Park is a registered historic district with over 120 contributing elements. The Save Our Springs Ordinance was enacted in 1992 to protect the quality of Barton Springs. In 1997, the Barton Springs salamander was listed as an endangered species, and several years later, Blues on the Green and Austin city limits came into existence. There's a lot more detail on the history in the report, and I really encourage you all to read about it. It's a really fascinating history of this part in Austin. So we have a map of some of the historic assets in the park. This is highlighting just a few, but there are over 120 historic assets in the park. The concrete picnic tables that are in the pecan grove being just one of those. Zilker Clubhouse, the bathhouse. Zilker Park is just rich in the historic assets within the 350 acres. And there are thousands of historic photos of Zilker Park throughout the years. These are just a handful depicting some of the elements within the park, like the sunken gardens, the bathhouse, and this central image is a bridge that used to cross Barton Springs on the west side of the pool that washed away in a flood, and you can still see one of the abutments there. I'm going to hand it over to Jonathan to talk about ecology.
Thanks, Claire. My name is Jonathan Ogren. I'm with Sigla Group, and we got to focus on the ecology of the site and bring that into the vision plan. We were fortunate to be able to work with Barton Springs Conservancy and the city ahead of the vision planning process to create the natural resource inventory for Zilker, which some of this work feeds out of. Next slide, please. Zilker Park is part of the Barton Springs segment of the Edwards Aquifer. It's this incredible water system where water flows across the surface throughout the contributing zone, goes into the ground in the recharge zone, and comes out at places like Barton Springs and Cold Springs, Barton Springs being within the Zilker Park area. In addition, at a regional perspective, the park is part of both the hill country to the west, that dotted line going from the bottom of the page up, and the blackland prairie to the north. That change in ecosystem results in changes in topography, soils, rainfall, and plant communities. The result being Zilker has these amazing, huge regional systems that make it more diverse and more robust ecologically. Next slide, please. Kind of bringing that down to the site level, the geology in the soil, the substrates of the site create the foundation of the ecology we're seeing. And of course, those are influenced by both the hill country as well as the blackland prairie, with the hill country having those limestone soils and the blackland prairie having those richer soils to the east. We got to look at some of the soil health throughout the site. And as you might expect, in some of those areas that are overused or maybe used in a strange way, like parking in the polo fields, we find unhealthy soils. Whereas if you go into the natural areas, you find richer soils, you find more organic material, you find more soil fauna available. The results of that foundation and the cutting of water throughout the landscape create the topography, with the steep slopes to the western side at Zilker Preserve, where you get up to around 560 feet. And that looks down to the lake that is around 428 feet elevation. So 130-foot change in elevation throughout the site. Next slide, please. And of course, you can't really talk about Zilker Park without talking about the water. So many people go there to enjoy the water. It's so clear that a lot of the landscape is defined by that water running through there. So the cliff walls of Eanes Creek within the preserve and the floodplain there, and the large floodplain of Barton Creek, and of course the springs itself and Lady Bird Lake in the shore of Lady Bird Lake. The site is made up of 3 different watersheds: Lady Bird Lake, Eanes Creek, Barton Creek. Those are protected by water quality buffers that you see in the bottom right-hand corner. And of course, the Edwards Aquifer manifests in the park as those springs, with the largest ones being Barton Springs, found in the pool, Eliza Springs to the north of the pool, Old Mill Springs or Sunken Gardens to the south of the creek, and then up the creek, you have Upper Barton Springs within the creek bed itself. Next slide, please. Those spring systems, as well as wetlands and steep slopes, are sensitive environmental features. Some of those are termed critical environmental features. And throughout the vision planning process, we'll be taking note of those and making sure that new infrastructure or even old infrastructure accommodates those and thinks about those. In the bottom right-hand corner, we have a salamander. It turns out that this site is home to 2 endangered species, the Barton Springs salamander and the Austin blind salamander, that are found in those 4 springs. And they're a unique species that we have a conservation plan in place, both at the site level and the regional level, to protect. Next slide, please. And then one of the important things to think about are the plant communities of the site. They bring in all the elements just described, and they create the framework for our experience at the site and the framework for the ecology and the diversity of the site. We were able to survey the plants here and found over 380 species, along with 16 different plant communities in various stages of health, from degraded to pretty robust. They include woodlands, savannas, meadows. Some of those are riparian, near water, and some of those are upland, away from the water. Through this process and thinking through the vision plan, we're able to think about what areas can be restored, how areas can be managed better, where green stormwater infrastructure can come into play, where canopy enhancement can come into play, and where climate adaptation and mitigation will be critical for the site. And I'll turn it back over to others.
Great. My name is Charlie McCabe. I'm a parks consultant, and I'm working on investigating programming, funding, and partnerships. So next slide, please. So I wanted to give you a little bit of a background about who is currently visiting Zilker Park and what the city collects in terms of funding or revenue from both events as well as kind of day-to-day programming. And my thanks to city staff who have responded graciously to my numerous information requests to try to build this information. What we have seen based on the city data is that daily visitation to Zilker continues to increase. And this is driven primarily by Barton Springs Pool, which now has over 1 million visitors a year based on 2019 data. But coming up in 2nd and 3rd place are the Austin Nature and Science Center, which has over 138,000 people a year, and Zilker Botanic Garden, which has over 115,000 a year, as well as Splash and the many other amenities such as the Hillside Theater that do that. When you put all that information together, we estimate that there's at least 7,200 people coming to Zilker Park every day, which results in a little over 2.6 million visitors annually. We're continuing to make sure that we dig and try to find every group or every individual that's coming, and we'll be updating that information. As a result of both programs and events, the city collected directly a little over $2.4 million in fiscal 2019 for these events, for pool visitation, for reservable facilities, as well as entrance fees to the Botanic Gardens. Nearly all of this revenue is deposited in the city's general fund, which is the way most revenues come to the city and PARD. We should also mention that there is a coalition of nonprofits that work to fund improvements to Zilker. These include the Garden Conservancy, the Austin Parks Foundation, Barton Springs Conservancy, and others. And they bring in revenue, or they give donations and grants to the city that range pretty widely between $500,000 a year to $3 million a year, depending on the projects, depending on the grants, and depending on the efforts that are going on there. Next slide, please. We do want to mention that concessions are a big part of revenue or income funding for Zilker, as are some of the large events. And then we give you some kind of numbers for income and concessions. Generally speaking, concessions are governed by long-term contracts and provide the city with both a minimum required payment and a percentage of gross sales. And we are investigating other parks in other cities to see how that compares and contrasts. And you can find some more information about that in the initial site assessment report. Large events continue to be covered by the ordinances that were revised following the 2017 Parkland Events Task Force report. Events are capped. They're currently at 26 days a year, and they have not expanded in terms of total days or attendance since 2017 and actually long before that. Current large day visitation is, for all those 26 days, is a little over 950,000 people, or about 36,000 people per day. And then you can see the revenue and the percentage that is paid directly to the city. Concession contracts as well as events are managed by the Parks Department through either the Office of Special Events or through the Parks Board in approving concession contracts negotiated by the city staff. The report also goes into more detail about some of the parks we're looking at in other cities, the challenges that they have. We've looked for and found a number of parks that have similar types of attractions and destinations and also challenges. And we look forward to expanding and exploring more of those as we continue the process. And I'll turn it back to Claire.
Thanks, Charlie. So most people know of the bigger events like ACL, Kite Festival, and Trail of Lights, but there are actually hundreds of events and programs that happen in the park almost daily throughout the year. So in an effort to understand what the busiest times of the year were, we put together this calendar of some of the bigger events that happen in the different facilities. And just visually, you can see that starting in June through the end of the year, the park is really busy with some of the events that are very familiar. We have a lot of summer camps that are happening, the concerts, and just as an asterisk, this is of course during a normal non-pandemic year, which we're hoping to get back into full swing of next year. So getting back to the interactive part of the presentation, I'd love to know what events you enjoy attending at the park. And so you'll just enter that in and we'll see your responses as they come in. So we have plays, ACL, free events, Trail of Light, none, theater, days that are not events, more plays, the Zilker Christmas tree, all right, Kite Festival. This is giving us a flavor for what people enjoy out there, the Starlight Social, musicals. All right. Just a few more seconds and I'll go ahead and close it out. You have some water things like kayaking. Barton Springs University, we heard about that a lot from the Nature and Science Center. And the polar bear swim. All right, let me go ahead and close this out. Next question is, how do you spend money in Zilker Park? And you'll select all that apply: parking, facility rental, boat rentals, pool entry, special event tickets, program at facilities, I don't spend money while at Zilker, or other. Seeing a lot of pool entry. and some in parking and special event tickets. Leave this open for a few more seconds to try to get up to some of the numbers that I was seeing earlier. All right, I'll go ahead and close out in just a few seconds. All right. Now, in discussing mobility, it's been really clear that mobility themes are going to be very important to the vision plan. And our findings confirm what we really all know, underscoring what we experience and see when we go to Zilker. In short, no major surprises. It did, however, reinforce for the team that there are some significant mobility gaps within and going to and from the park today. So there are many modes to get you to and from Zilker. It's a very central location, but still some major access challenges. Of course, the experience varies greatly by day and week, with weekend afternoons having the highest travel demand. Mobility options are dominated by Barton Springs Road, Butler Trail, the Mopac Expressway, and Barton Springs and Mopac provide access, but are also significant barriers. We reviewed access mode by mode. Transit usage was low, micromobility trends, vehicular circulation, pedestrian networks, bike facilities, and parking lot layout and supply. So transit is likely the least used mode with pedestrian, with which visitors are accessing the park route today. The only route that directly serves the park is Route 30 with a 30-minute frequency, which is not typically conducive to high ridership. This only connects to downtown and Menchaca. So many trips directly require, or many trips to the park will require a transfer. The latest pre-COVID data we have indicates that average daily use is low at all park stops. And once you get off the bus, if you do choose to take that mode, the pedestrian connections are limited. For example, if you get off near the Botanic Garden, there's not a crossing on the south side of the road and no sidewalks and no crosswalk to get to the Botanic Garden. Not part of typical transit, but several park events have well-utilized shuttle service, especially connecting to Republic Square. So that success could provide a blueprint for improving access to the park generally, and this is something that we'll explore in more detail as we start to define future scenarios for the park. Despite the presence of some of Austin's signature trails like the Butler Trail Grade Belt and the Violet Crown, dedicated and comfortable bicycle facilities within the park are lacking. Also, circulation patterns within the park are primarily shaped by parking locations. The roads can be quite confusing. Some are one-way, others are two-way, and they can create bottlenecks like at Lou Neff. Barton Springs is a busy commuter arterial, the only place to cross Barton between Lady Bird Lake and Ben White, and the counts that you see on the map are from 2015. So parking in Zilker is dispersed and shaped by uneven demand. About 700 spaces throughout Zilker itself, arranged in small lots holding about 50 to 75 vehicles each. These are paid during the weekends and holidays. However, there are an additional 2,000 or so spots between the landfill and the polo fields currently treated as overflow. Paid parking has been helpful in managing demand, but the park needs a consistent parking management strategy and some supply changes in the sensitive areas. These parking locations also have shaped circulation patterns in the park, meaning that some of the circulation patterns are dominated by vehicular patterns, and these circulation patterns divide the park into distinct areas. Related to pedestrian mobility, again, the car infrastructure drives the pedestrian circulation patterns. We have limited dedicated sidewalks and paths for pedestrians between major destinations, which is a major barrier to accessibility. And most people, when they are in the park, are walking along roads or through the grass. Big pedestrian connectivity happens with the Butler Trail that connects to very far perimeter of the Austin core. And we have the connection to the Barton Creek Greenbelt Trail, which is great. There are 3 dedicated at-grade crossings along Barton Spring Road, and there is a pedestrian hybrid beacon that is frequently used at the CAT Metro stop. What may not be as used is the MOPAC shared use path that provides important pedestrian connections, especially during events, both south and across the lake to the high school and off-site parking. So we've got some more questions related to mobility. How often do you visit Zilker Park? So you might go daily, multiple times in a week, weekly, just 1 to 3 times a month, a few times a year, once a year. It's been a while, or I have never visited. Give you just a few more seconds. So it looks like we've got people that visit a few times a week. All right. I'm going to go ahead and close out. All right, looks like we've got some frequent visitors. And what time of day do you usually visit Zilker Park? Just generally, I know summer affects some things, but is it morning, afternoon, evening, night, or it really varies? All right. Most people, it varies. You might visit during the morning, afternoon, or evening. I'll go ahead and close it out in just a few seconds. All right. Thank you for that. And another question, how do you normally get to Zilker Park? And you can choose up to 2. Is that driving, by transit, walking or jogging, cycling, or something that is not listed here? Electric scooter or bike share is another option. And for our team site visits, we've been utilizing those scooters quite a bit to get there. I'll go ahead and close out in just a few seconds. I know some of the words are overlapping here, but it looks like the majority of our attendees tonight are driving, and a good number are cycling and walking. Okay, so the team has reviewed a lot of relevant plans that have, you'll see summarized in this site analysis and needs assessment report. There's been a lot of work done over the years by various groups and plans in discrete areas of the park. The Botanical Gardens did a first phase of their master plan process, and they're currently fundraising to go into the next part of their process. But the aim of this plan is really to pull the suggestions, the recommendations that have been put forth in citywide plans, like the climate equity plan, the park's long range plan, and other areas within the park, like the Botanical Gardens, the Barton Springs pool, and see what recommendations have been completed, what is yet to be completed, what is still relevant, and move that forward into some potential recommendations that'll be consolidated into this vision plan. So in understanding too the regulations, by City of Austin and other things that we need to be mindful of as we're thinking about improvements within the park. We have things like critical environmental features. We have compatibility setbacks with some of our adjacent neighbors. With the watersheds and Lady Bird Lake and our historical assets, there's a lot of the acreage within Zilker that will have limited to no development on it, just to be extremely careful of the sensitive environmental aspects that we have within the park. So currently, what would you consider the biggest barrier to enjoyment of Zilker Park? Is it traffic congestion, lack of parking, the speed of cars on Barton Springs Drive, the lack of pedestrian connections, lack of sidewalks, a lack of accessible parking, or others? And so you'll just be selecting one as the biggest barrier that you experience. They're seeing a lot of traffic congestion and the lack of parking, lack of pedestrian connections. I see all of the above in the chat. I'll give you just a few more seconds to leave us your thoughts. All right, I'm going to go ahead and close out. So traffic congestion and lack of parking. So circling back to what we've heard in our 4 months of conversations with some of the small groups and our technical advisory group and other comments that we've gotten from citizens to date, are kind of gelling around these categories that we'll go over in the next few slides. So we've heard a lot about education. We had the opportunity to talk with those who are running some of these programs within the park, but also some educators. And there's a desire for better accommodations for field trips for kids in the AISD and surrounding areas to use the park. Partnering with preschools for a nature-based experience for younger children, perhaps after-school programming or outdoor classrooms. A ranger, building upon the ranger educational program. We know that there's a great partnership that happens now, but making that available to other students throughout the city. And maybe a focus around environmental education, because Zilker is this really great resource for learning to appreciate the environment in which we're living in. And then we also want to make sure that we're telling the stories and honoring all of Zilker's histories. It could be signage, it could be programs, it could be walking tours, but exploring how we can do a better job at education within the park. Regarding accessibility, we heard a lot about this. Bus drop-off, kind of going back to difficulty for groups to come to the park. The drop-off and bus situation, particularly at the Nature and Science Center, is extremely difficult because of the way that that is situated now. We really need to improve the connections to accommodate and encourage non-vehicular travel, and that includes better connectivity and wayfinding and improvements needed for accessible access. We've heard ideas about a shuttle to the park and through the park, and creating gateways and a central hub, so people who are visiting for the first time have a place or a way to go and find information. Maybe that's digital, maybe that's a physical place, but we'll explore some of those alternatives in our design process. Under parking, this is top of mind for a lot of folks that are going to Zilker now, considering all options for parking quantity and locations, including off-site and shared use. So really understanding how many potential parking spaces are outside of the park and how might those be utilized for those who are visiting. Improving parking and access to the Botanical Garden and the Austin Nature and Science Center are two particular places that are really challenged with parking, both for everyday use and for the events that they host there. Considering alternative use for the boneyard and the landfill areas. So those are the areas really close to the lake on either side of MOPAC. Might it be parking, or might it be a restored ecological habitat? And in particular, the boneyard area, which is on the west side of MOPAC, might be a really great place to access the water for the Nature and Science Center and the kids that are going to learn there. Also, we've heard about restoring underutilized areas and current overflow parking to a better use. So maybe that's a place where people can play, or maybe it's restored ecology. Those are options we'll explore. We heard a lot about restrooms, especially in the baseline survey, and that there's currently inadequate facilities, and the quantity is really not sufficient for the number of visitors that Zilker is getting, even despite the large events. So we wouldn't expect to have restrooms for all of the events that happen, but for everyday use, we think there's an opportunity to increase the quality of use in the park with additional restroom locations. And then programming, events and programs that are happening in the park today really need better synchronization, and a main place where people can go to learn about what's happening. So maybe it's a kiosk in the park, or it's a website that really is better able to facilitate a person spending a day in the park. We also heard a lot about safety. So lighting, appropriate levels of lighting in the park at all times. You know, Austin's a dark sky city, and so that would be required regardless of what type of lighting went in. But making sure we're not overlighting some areas, but it is lit for safety and appropriately. And then there's a lot of discussion about the lack of APD presence at the park. We do have some homeless individuals that are living in the park right now. And so those are things that we need to have further discussions about how the Zilker plan can address those. And then we heard about noise, most particularly from the Botanical Garden and the Austin Nature and Science Center. If you're near MOPAC at either one of those facilities, especially the nature preschool at the Nature and Science Center, MOPAC is very loud. It's a presence that you can't forget about. So is there a way to mitigate some of that noise and really help the park return back to a peaceful place to be? Around events, we heard a lot about how the large events like ACL close the park to the public for many days. We know we're capped at the number of days by the city's ordinance, but it is, even though the park may be closed, it kind of has other effects, like people being able to access some of the facilities like a botanical garden, or even preschool drop off for those that have their kids in preschool. The need for better, safer, and wider connections into the park, which could help facilitate better access without vehicles. We need to review the location of major utilities within the park to best site events. So really looking at where we already have existing infrastructure and making sure that that's planned for appropriately. We really could use more infrastructure to reduce reliance on generators, is something we heard from some of the event promoters. And events in Zilker should continue to set the example for green best practices. So the next question is, you're choosing three. Choose the top 3 issues that you think the Zilker Park Vision Plan should address. So we've got climate change, including urban heat island effect, parking, safe circulation and connectivity, clear wayfinding, erosion and compaction along the creek banks, water quality impacts, Zilker as an educational resource, rewilding key areas of the park, better aligning events and programs, or if you have another idea, we'd love to hear it. All right. Seeing a lot of votes come in for many of these. So climate change and rewilding, key areas of the park, erosion concerns, parking. It's hard to pick three. But the good news is that our vision plan will address all of these things. This question is more to see what the community feels are the biggest priorities. I'll close out in just a few seconds. All right, go ahead and close out. And I'm going to hand it over to Kurt Culbertson on the design workshop team.
Good evening. I'm Kurt Culbertson. I'm a principal at Design Workshop and one of Claire's coworkers. I'd like to talk a few moments about the idea of guiding principles and goals. As you know, and Claire mentioned earlier, we have spent a great deal of time with small group discussions. We've been talking to city council members. We have a technical advisory committee. And from those conversations, we have gleaned these draft guiding principles and goals. And so I say draft because I'm going to ask you some components, some questions in a few minutes, and would like your input on whether these are headed the right direction or whether we need additions or modifications to those. As we view it, the guiding principles are really some fundamental guidelines, if you will, that will drive the vision plan. Things that we need to understand, some big statements that really describe the big picture, right? And they're the kind of things that can help us make decisions if we have two competing ideas. We can reference back to those guiding principles to see if we're going in the right direction or not. Goals are specific, they're measurable, they're attainable, they're realistic, and they're time bound. And so how do we know that we're achieving the kinds of principles and objectives we set out at the beginning here? So let's take a look at, next slide, please, at the guiding principles, as we would say, the draft guiding principles, right? One is to guide future stewardship of the park. The plan should be forward-looking and look to embrace its challenges and opportunities for future generations. The others, as Jonathan went through earlier, is really the nature and ecology of this landscape. The plan should treat the park as an ecological treasure, recognize the park's relationship to water. We've heard a lot about the importance of Barton Springs, about the watershed, about the aquifers and so forth, and to really understand opportunities for interaction with the lake without compromising environmental integrity. History and culture. Claire's mentioned that it's really important that we celebrate all of the history of Zilker Park, much of which is really yet to be discovered and communicated to the broader public. So the idea of really understanding Zilker as a metropolitan park that's a regional draw and focus and treats all of the park's historic and cultural resources as a valued legacy for future generations. Diversity and inclusion as a guiding principle, right? The idea that it the park should serve all of the community of Austin, and that programs should align with the community interest. And programs can be offerings, they could be activities, they could be educational programs. We'll be talking about it at our next meeting with you. Accessibility is a big issue. Many of the comments I've been following in the chat talk about this question of accessibility. The idea that the plan should knit segmented pieces of the park together, ensuring a more accessible, safe, and connected park. North and south sides of Barton Spring Road, we know that's a big issue. The north and south shores of Lady Bird Lake, the east and west sides of Barton Creek, the east and west sides of Mopac, and that the park truly becomes a place that can be accessed by multiple options, right? And then sustainability, the idea that the plan should champion sustainable best practices for the park, that it serves an example of sustainability, protecting and enhancing our natural spaces and assets, and addressing issues like tree canopy and climate change and so forth, which we've discussed earlier. Next slide, please. So let's look a bit for a moment about what the goals might be around nature and ecology. One is to protect, enhance, and restore the land and waterscape. As Jonathan pointed out, we've identified opportunities for environmental uplift as we restore and enhance the natural ecology of the park. The idea of establishing an interpretive program to educate visitors about the park's sensitive features. Public stewardship, I thinking could be enhanced by developing such an interpretive program when people really understand or are educated about the sensitivity of these environmental features in the park. To champion best practices in green design, planning, and land management, and to ensure safe and sustainable access to the water, including entry to Lady Bird Lake and protection of Barton Creek, and then protect Zilker's natural resources for generations to come. Okay? So now let's ask a question, if you might. Do you feel that the nature and ecology goals that I just reviewed with you are what the Zilker Park Vision Plan should address? Yes, absolutely, almost, but we're missing some things, and please use the chat or the comment during the Q&A, or no, these are the wrong things. Are we generally heading in the right direction in terms of what those goals should be? So we're getting very good response here, but I can tell there are a lot of other ideas that are out there that are worthy of further consideration. More comments? Okay. Claire, can I suggest we give it a few more seconds and then close the voting? There you go. Okay. Let's talk a bit about diversity and inclusion. The goals through, as I said, the draft goals through the conversations we've had to date around diversity and inclusion are welcoming to individuals, small groups, and able to accommodate large groups as well. The plan should support equitable access with special focus on safety, accessibility, diverse events and programming, and connectivity. A third goal, support new and enhance existing learning opportunities within the park. So those three draft goals around diversity and inclusion, right? Let's take a look at that as a question. How do you feel about those three goals? Are those absolutely the right ones? Or we're close, but we're missing some others? And if so, please add some others, or are we missing it entirely? And if we're missing it entirely, or you have other ideas, please add those to the comments or the chat or in the Q&A. So the goals are being welcoming to groups of all sizes, small, but also being able to accommodate large groups, to provide a variety of programming and activities that are attractive to all members of the Austin population, right? And then enhancing educational opportunities. Okay. So pretty close to the number of comments we had on the last survey question, right? Okay, now let's look around about goals around history and culture, right? The first is honor and respect the park's history and cultural resources and integrate them into the future life of the park. Second, around history and culture is to provide a successful balance between historic preservation and current needs. Third is to tell the stories of the people and the history of the park to better enrich the visitor experience, right? Fourth, create opportunities for local artists and art to be part of the park spaces. These opportunities might include music, performance, and temporary exhibits. And fifth, celebrate the stories of the people that lived on the land throughout history and to bring to light those stories that are not often heard. Okay? So pause for a minute and review those, right? Honor and balance. Okay? How do you feel about history and cultural goals? Are those on the right track? Or we're close, but you got some other ideas in mind? Or we've missed the point here. We've got some other thoughts altogether. Okay. So please, if you've answered almost or no, please add your thoughts on that in the chat. Okay. The next goal around accessibility. Ensure there are multiple safe and enjoyable and convenient modes of transportation, right? Improve non-automotive modal access to, from, and within the park. So how do we do that? In support of ambitious mode split and climate goals within Austin City policy. So how do we improve non-automobile mode of access to the park? Improve pedestrians, bicycles, and vehicular circulation. Examine the surrounding trail network. Make sure that we're optimizing connectivity, right? Improve the wayfinding to and from different park destinations, right? And use transit assets efficiently so as to preserve park space for ecological and recreational systems. Okay? So how do you feel about those accessibility goals? On the right track? Almost? Missed some. And I see some comments coming through on the chat, so please help us with our thinking here and add your thoughts about how we get these goals dialed in a little more precisely. Incentivize non-driving. Okay. Give it a few more seconds and then let's close this poll. So now let's look at goals around sustainability. One would be to implement adaptive management strategies to create a resilient landscape in the face of climate change and dynamic user needs, right? So we have the issues of climate change, changing user needs. How do we create a resilient landscape? Second, as an urban park, Zilker should achieve balance between metropolitan uses and ecological environmental needs. Third is to balance revenue needs with operation and maintenance of the park, making sure there are adequate funds for operation and maintenance. Next is provide equitable opportunities for access to the park and the enjoyment of amenities. The next is to explore public-private partnerships that extend the reach of the park department to accommodate new opportunities. And then finally, sustain the implementation and maintenance of the park and utilize the support of volunteers. So how do we feel about those sustainability goals? On track? Almost there? And again, please add your thinking to the chat. Lots of thoughts about this one, I can tell. Lots of thoughts about additional goals or wording. A number of people said these aren't the right ones, so please chime in and add your thoughts. Now I'll give it a few more seconds and then we'll close this poll. Thank you very much. So if you feel like a goal was missing, let us know which goals you would like to add. There we go. Starting to come in. Please type those in if you will. Number of comments about nature, the importance of the environment, the idea that recreational choices should reflect the needs of a diverse community, concerns about spray suntan lotion and loud music, more accessible parking, integrated educational opportunities. All good comments. Keep them coming. We'll give it a few more minutes, or a few more seconds, excuse me. If you would please add your comments. If we close this question, as you think of something else, please add it to the chat if you would. Okay. So this is a key question. This is just a temperature check for us about how this evening's presentation has gone. So although I may not agree with everything stated today, I feel like the overall process for the vision plan is headed in the right direction. How are you feeling about how our start is rolling? Someone made a note they couldn't finish typing on the last question. If you would add that comment to the chat, we'll make sure we'll pick that up. Okay, and if you're neutral or disagree with how things, you feel this has gone so far, please add your thoughts about why you feel you're neutral or disagree to the chat as well. Too early to tell. Somebody's just stated in the chat. Fair comment. Okay. A lot of thoughts about listening to diverse voices. As you'll recall, Claire asked a number of questions about where, what council districts people came from, general demographic questions. This will help us to understand where we need more targeted engagement efforts around populations that may not be adequately represented here. Okay. So we will give it a few seconds and then close the polling. All right, let's talk a little bit about next steps. You know, as I think Claire mentioned early on, in July, there will be pop-up events in every district and at Zilker Park, and starting this weekend at the Givens Pool. So look forward to those pop-up events. We will have a second community meeting August 10th that will discuss programming in the park. And by programming, we mean the kinds of activities or recreational opportunities or educational programs that are found within the park. What's there now that you like? What's there now that you don't like? What's missing? That will be a very important focus of the discussion on October 10th. If you want to reach out to the city's project manager, Greg's contact email is listed there. Feel free to offer questions or comments to him. And then we're going to open it up for questions for the remainder of the time. And if you've been following the chat, you need to know we may not be able to simply get to every question this evening. We've certainly got a lot of comments and questions thus far, but there will be a follow-up email sent to all meeting attendees and posted to the project website that will make a point to address every question we receive. So if you don't get a specific response tonight, look for the project website and we'll be answering those questions in writing. Okay, and with that, I will turn it back over to Claire.
All right, let me downsize this. So you've got the panel. Justin, is there a question that we should start with?
So I believe most of the questions in the Q&A have been responded to. I know there's been lots of the comments there as well. And I guess here's a quick question just to start off with just about pop-ups, and this will just get us warmed up. But Bobby's asking, why are the District 6 and 8 pop-up events on Monday morning, but all others are on a weekend? So let's start with a tough one.
I'm not recalling without my list of pop-ups, but we really wanted to focus on pools given it's summer. So you'll see on the weekends when we would have a lot of people going to the pools, we'll set up there. And then we do have a couple of YMCA locations where we know people are coming in the morning to go work out or go swimming. And so we chose some weekdays when we thought we would see most of the or bigger crowds coming through.
Thanks, Claire. So I just want to also acknowledge that we did answer a lot of questions. If there is additional clarity that needs, I know that it can be a little difficult bouncing back and forth between the chat and the and the questions and answers. So if you need to ask them, we are trying to respond because it is difficult to bounce back and forth, primarily to those in the Q&A section. So if you have a chance to do that, if you are unable to respond in the question and answer, then you can also raise your hand. And I see that we already have an example with Roy. And so, Roy, I'm going to press the button that will allow you to unmute, and then I'll let you have your question, answer your question. And then we'll look at kind of go back and forth between the Q&As, questions, and then those who raise their hand. So, Roy, you should be able to unmute yourself.
Okie doke. First, thank you very much for everyone involved in this, all of y'all and all of the participants. It's disappointing to me, though, that we're not talking about the idea of alcohol sales at the cafe. This is going to have an overwhelming impact on the whole park. And so it's difficult to have this conversation and feel like we're really accomplishing something when we still don't have an idea of what our park is actually going to be. We know what it is now. We're hearing things about how people want it to be, but we're not able to say, we want it to be a place that you go and enjoy. I just don't understand how anyone has to have a beer to enjoy Zilker Park. I don't understand how you have to have something to drink to enjoy Barton Springs. There are thousands of bars in Austin. There's only one Zilker Park. There's only one Barton Springs. I think we need to keep it that special place. And I would hope that this panel would weigh in on that, because it's a decision that's still up in the air. And it seems to be pushed mostly by people that stand to profit off of that will never go to the park anyway. And I could go on, but y'all don't want to hear it, I'm sure. And so once again, thank you. I really appreciate what y'all have done here this evening. And I hope that some of these meetings will be in person so that I can shake my filthy fist at you when I get upset with them. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Roy. So I guess I'll start off, and I'll just I think Greg or Ricardo may want to also talk. And it's not that we're trying to avoid that. It's that right now it's not in this process. So the process has moved forward to the Planning Commission, and all of the comments that we receive, we are collecting, and even the comments that are put here, they will be collected and they will be shared with the project manager with that, and that will be all put together. So even I know there's lots of people who want answers and want a stance, but right now that is was discussed at the Parks and Recreation Board, and I think the next step may be the Planning Commission. So there's still opportunities for you to share your voice at the Planning Commission when that opportunity comes up. So thanks, Roy. And then Casey, did you see another question in the Q&A that you wanted to address?
Well, it looks like Ingrid has her hand raised, so I will unmute her and allow her to ask her question. Oh, looks like she's muted. Ingrid, if you want to ask your question. Okay, well, there might be some technical difficulties. Let's see.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
It seems to me that the very first question that needs to be addressed in all this planning is the funding question. Because if your funding depends on having to have events and other things of private-public partnerships to even maintain the park. And I know parks have been underfunded forever and ever. And I served on the special event task force, so I know a lot of the background. One of the biggest issue is that the revenue from the parks goes to the general fund and not to the parks to maintain it. But it seems to me that a lot of your planning will be driven by the idea that you need to make money to maintain the park for everybody else. So I know this is not within the designer's purview, but politically speaking, I think we really need to set the policy on how we fund public parks so we do not have to commercialize them in order to maintain them. And I'm not saying that all commercial events are bad. I'm not saying that at all. I know there are some events that are much beloved and people want to see them, but I do think we're getting more and more to where we need to sell the public land just to maintain them. That's it.
So Ingrid, just to clarify, if I can, I'm trying to identify the question you're asking. What are the possibilities of not having additional outside funds? Is that what you're asking?
Well, I'm saying that part of your goals were, for example, you were considering public-private partnerships, etc. And those are normally vehicles like with Austin Parks Foundation. They can collect money and donate it to the city, whereas the city cannot require that big events pay additional money, but the Parks Foundation can do it for you. But it forces this relationship where the city is dependent on nonprofits or private partnerships to collect money and funnel it back. So they get to set the conditions. And I think that there just needs to be a policy discussion. And I'm wondering whether anybody is having that. The policy discussion should be, how are parks funded in the city of Austin, so we do not have to depend on commercial entities to maintain them.
Great, thank you. Yes, so I think you're exactly right. That is a policy decision, and it's I think I saw somebody put in the chat that is determined by city council, and so I think that is an ongoing conversation and one that should continue to be a question and will be as we continue, especially with the caps that are now in place. Greg, did you have anything you wanted to add? I see you kind of leaning.
Yes, just Greg Montes with Parks and Rec. I was going to also just make a comment that not only would the council have to chime in on that, but being that the Parks Department is managed by the city manager's office, the city manager, Spencer Cronk, would obviously, and his team of assistant city managers would probably also have to be part of that discussion with the mayor and the council members, as well as our director for the Parks Department. So just wanted to add that in there as well.
Thank you. I see a question from Clark Hancock, and I see, Clark, you also have your hand up. So I'm going to start with these questions, and then you'll get a chance to clarify. But one of the questions is, besides vision, will the guidelines established for operations and institutionalizing the continual evaluation of the park, will we establish guidelines for institutionalizing the continual evaluation of the park? And then also, as we were talking about the values, Clark is also just asking for clarity. Will the determination of the values be a part of this process? And so, Clark, I'm going to just go ahead and let you unmute, and so you can just provide some clarity there.
Yes, and this kind of feeds into the conversation that the other folks have been observing here. And when you talk about the city manager and the council making decisions, this whole process for me, most fundamental thing besides specific recommendations, is the values that are determined, the community values that we are looking at for what we see the value of this piece of land is. The type of experiences that we hold of value. And there's going to be trade-offs involved. When we talk about sustainability, well, one of the aspects of sustainability is social equity. And if what we do is create a place that is by nature requires people to spend lots of money to come here or spend lots of time and effort to come here. We're making a very elitist place. The whole idea behind the concession stand, what's going on there now, I know that's not part of this discussion, but it is a perfect example. If the plans that are going through right now are put into place, especially with the introduction of adult beverages, I want you to think about something. 5-year-old kid with their parents has a dollar bill in their hand. They come up to that concession stand with that dollar bill and they get their ice cream. That magical experience that they have. If we make it into a destination cafe, that experience will no longer be possible. And using that one example, we can do the same thing with every other aspect of Zilker Park. So it comes back to the values. What is it that we want people to experience here? Or do we just want to get the greedy dollar so that the Parks Department can have their business run properly instead of looking for alternate funding sources? I'm sorry, got off on a tangent there. I'll be like Roy, wave my fist. Okay.
All right, thanks, Clark. So I guess just going back to thinking about the determination of values for this park. Claire, do you have a chance to think through that?
Yeah, and Clark, hopefully I'm going to answer your question. We do plan on having measurable outcomes that help this plan stay alive. And so the idea would that be that you've got measurable outcomes, a roadmap that in simplest terms might be a checklist that is checked on and on a very regular basis to make sure that initiatives are moving forward, that some of the recommendations are coming to fruition. And it's a tool that the city can use to speak with council members, parks board members, and really be representative of the community's vision and values as you were discussing. And all in a plan that is accessible for the community to use to have those conversations.
I'd be happy to add on a little bit there.
Yeah, go ahead, Jonathan.
So Clark, there's many ways you can look at monitoring. Monitoring was also something you mentioned in values. And so I think one of the purposes of this process is to start to understand the values of the community, of the people that are involved, and we're getting some feedback tonight. We, as I mentioned in my presentation, got to look at the site through the lens of ecology and thinking about what the metrics are, how you monitor that. We also took numerous photo points throughout the site so we can see how it changes over time. We did do a plant survey. We also did a bird survey. We also did a soil assessment. All of those are set as things we can build on over time, and then thinking about those metrics. So we can create metrics associated with repairing environmental degradation, capturing rainfall on the site, particularly as it goes into Barton Springs, Eliza Springs, Barton Creek. We can think about what are the metrics for enhancing the user's experience. So we can think about climate adaptation and mitigation and urban heat island effect, and how much area of impervious cover has a tree canopy associated with it. We can think about, are we facilitating stewardship? How many volunteers are contributing time at Zilker Park? Restore and enhance plant communities. How much have we expanded those natural areas? How much have we reduced mowing? So we're looking at numerous ways of measuring outcomes over time. As many people have already mentioned in the chat, it's the doing that matters. So we need to set it up so it can be done. There's also funding mechanisms associated with it. Just to address that really quick. PARD is strapped for cash. We need to all, as Roy Whaley mentioned in the chat, talk to your decision makers if you would like more budgets going towards PARD. At the same time, there's a number of local organizations that support our parks, the Trail Foundation, Peace Park Conservancy, Barton Springs Conservancy, Shoal Creek Conservancy, and all these organizations are pushing for more dollars to go into their parks. Many of us could argue, are they doing good or bad? But it is a mechanism for you all and for us to get more resources into our park system.
I just want to also add that we are looking at a number of parks that are similar, have similar challenges and opportunities, such as Zilker, in different cities. And we're looking at the wide range of public funding mechanisms that different cities use, everything from bonds to sales tax to park district fees to kind of everything in between. And we'll report on those as we go through the process.
All right, thank you. I see a question that I know, I'm not sure if it's Garrett Nick or Nick Garrett has been waiting on a response from, but he's asking in the question and answer, what role does APD, Austin Police Department, play in this process as far as enforcement is concerned? Is there the potential for designated park officers to patrol and ticket violators? Is there somebody who can address these questions?
I can try to take that question. At one time, my understanding was that there was park police that were patrolling throughout our parks. And I don't know if Ricardo has more history and information regarding that, but at some point that that particular police force was integrated into the regular force that we now see throughout the city. So my understanding is park rangers play a role in the park. They try to, work with park visitors and try to address some of the violations that they're witnessing on some of their patrols throughout the park. But at the same time, the park rangers don't have a lot of authority that APD officers do. So that is a challenge. And I think that if there is a violation going on in the park, then you should obviously call 911 or 311, depending on the nature of the emergency. Ricardo, I don't know if you have something to add.
Actually, I think that's a very good comment and something that we probably need to think more about here, Greg, as far as our technical advisory committee group. We have representation that we meet monthly at the minimum with departments, but I think that's a very good suggestion. We need to add APD to that because they do play a very important role that we, I'm just glad that comment came forward.
Great. Thank you. I see Sarah Faust has a hand up, so I'm going to, Sarah, if you are available, I will. Okay, Sarah, I think we can hear you.
Thank you. My question was related to, as I wrote in the Q&A, there was a slide in the beginning of the presentation, I believe it was slide 10, that stated purposes of the Zilker Park Vision Plan. One of the purposes was financial sustainability, and that was described as I believe a strategy or a plan that better balances operations and maintenance at Zilker with generated revenue. And I was just wanting to get some information about where those purposes came from, like what the reference or the citation for that particular purpose being financial sustainability. That was earlier in the vision process, or what the source of that is.
Hi, Sarah. I'll start, and Charlie, feel free to jump in. But part of the scope that was outlined in the request for qualifications from consultants was this idea about understanding all of the revenue that the park currently makes from the various events and the concessions and things, and understanding the cost to maintain the park, operate the park, and coming up with a balance. And that balance will, of course, come through community engagement and understanding that additional layer of desires and needs from the community.
So you're saying that came from the request for qualifications that was sort of probably written by PARD and went through maybe the Parks Board or something?
Yes.
That's the source of that. Okay, that's helpful. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Claire. I see. Do you look? So this is a question from Craig, and it's asking, I think, for perspective. Do you look at a park as like maybe your approach? Do you look at a park as a thing to pour human activities into, or a destination in itself for people to come to enjoy? And then followed up with a question or with a comment. The first could easily destroy the second. In fact, that's the way humans continue to eat up the earth. So just I'm gonna make this a question, and Craig can feel free to type in and clarify. But what is the overall approach? And I know I'm kind of setting you up here a little, but using the values that Design Workshop and PARD are approaching this process with when looking at Zilker.
Claire, would
Yeah,
you
I was
like?
trying.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, it's a good question. What strikes me is that there are a variety of different types of parks, all of which we've worked on. Some are in denser, more urban areas, and the community's desire is they be heavily programmed with playgrounds or ball fields or a variety of things. So in that sense, those kinds of parks really are filling a need to fill up with people, if you will. There are also parks that are much more natural in character, much lower intensity of use, much greater focus on preservation of the natural environment, and they are very unprogrammed in many ways in terms of attracting for people to come there. I think both the challenge and the opportunity of Zilker is that there are areas that are particularly on the south part of the park that are quite natural in character that don't have a lot of people in them. And there are other areas of the park that are highly used. So Zilker, as its scale and its unique history in Austin, is a combination of both programmed areas and very passive, unprogrammed areas. And I think the challenge of this vision plan is to work with the people of the community to try to find the sweet spot of what's the right amount of activity, what's the right amount of solitude. Maybe it's possible to have some of both, and that determining that is really the nature of what this vision plan is all about.
Thank you, Kurt. I'll jump on to the next question from Clark, is also asking about if we can compare our findings to previous studies to identify historic changes of usage.
What was the question again, Justin?
You bet. So I think this was also speaking to the portion that Charlie spoke to about some of the park visiting and the findings around the sauna to compare those findings from this most recent study to previous studies to identify historic changes of use and visitation.
Yeah. I might also speak to that if I might. Jonathan might speak to the availability of historic environmental data. I do know that we have gathered to try to understand change over time a number of historic maps, a series of plans throughout time of the evolution of the park, of aerial photographs, which would certainly give us some indication of how tree canopy and so forth might change over time. And part of the purpose of establishing metrics, if you will, is that it would allow us to monitor change moving forward. Jonathan, if you might speak to what kind of historic environmental data we might have and how we can measure change.
So if you go back to 1839, when Austin became the capital of Texas, they talked about the 750 acres around the Colorado River and the banks of the Colorado River as this amazing riparian area. By the 1860s, there were already records of degradation, of erosion, and the depleting of soils, the loss of wildlife for game. And so the story at Zilker Park is not different than that. A lot of the environmental degradation that's occurred at the site happened 100, 150 years ago. The most recent aerials we have are from 1940s, but you can see a sequence of clearing, particularly along the banks of Barton Creek in 1940 all the way up to 1989. So if you look at the riparian, or what would be a riparian woodland, along Barton Creek, it doesn't exist in many areas because it had been cleared for so many years. Also, interestingly, if you look at some of the historic imagery that goes back further than the 40s, you can see that many of the trails that are the roads now, but trails before, were defined by carriages moving throughout what was generally agricultural fields in the area. And what we've done is inherited that pattern of use from horse carriage to car that didn't go too fast with not too many, to cars that are moving at high rates of speed, and massive amounts of them. And we haven't really rethought that transportation plan or that ecological plan or that use of the site, going from historic or prehistoric indigenous folks living in this area to a history of extraction and use to recreation. And so what this vision plan allows us to do is integrate those many elements. So while we see numerous examples of degradation and loving to death at the park today, we are poised to be able to really recognize those ideas of ecological restoration with this type of plan and the information we have about management.
Thanks. And there was a little clarity, specifically studies done in the 70 and 80 related to the Zilker Nature, 70s and 80s, I guess the decades, Clark, related to the Zilker Nature Preserve and the ANC Master Plan. And Clark, I think that may be some ongoing conversations there. And I think that there's a lot of space for us to continue to look at those. And so thanks for sharing that. I do recognize that it's 8:04. And I want to be respectful of everyone's time here. So I do see one more question that was put in there, discussing about pop-ups. And I know there's a question about more pop-ups happening at the park at different times to sample thoughts from visitors to the park itself. And I think that is something that we can look into. We're also just trying to make sure that this park is able to connect to people across the city as well. And I think to account for some of those different times. And so Claire, I want to pass it back to you so you can discuss some next steps and add in any additional information you have.
Sure, and to the question about pop-ups within the park, we'll be having the pop-up on July 16th. That's at the pool. So trying to grab some people as they're coming into or from Barton Springs Pool on a Friday late afternoon, early evening. But we do plan on putting some signs throughout the park during the process that will allow people to access information digitally on a website about specific sites within the park and allow for that feedback while they're learning about elements within the park. So we have some things in mind there, but I appreciate any additional thoughts you have. And our direct next step will be at the Givens Park pool pop-up this coming Saturday from 10 to 1, followed by pop-ups throughout the month of July, and then heading into August with a second community meeting. And so we've heard a lot of really great feedback about tonight and the process and what could be easier. We'll definitely be taking that into account. And I just really appreciate everybody's time tonight. So thank you.